Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. Wanting to have a child is a very personal desire for those facing infertility, male or female, or who need medical assistance to create their own family, such as same-sex couples or single parents. In vitro fertilization offers a bridge to parenthood. Across the country, people who've opposed abortion are considering and sometimes reconsidering their stances towards IVF. Some of the same groups that helped to outlaw abortion in states like Tennessee, such as the Heritage Foundation, are now going for more regulation of IVF. Now, President Trump issued an executive order early this year to drive down the cost of IVF and help increase the national birth rate at the same time. But the latest reports indicate the president may have backed off this as a priority. Outside of Washington, Alabama's state Supreme Court threw fertility clinics into a bit of chaos when it ruled that embryos created through IVF are considered children under state law, halting IVF in the state. Alabama later passed legislation seeking to offer a degree of protection for IVF providers, but many legal questions remain. In response, this spring, we're to Tennessee. Tennessee became the first state in the South to pass legislation to specifically protect IVF. It's called the Fertility Treatment and Contraceptive Protection Act. And even though it was sponsored by Republicans, GOP lawmakers nearly derailed it on the floor of the state house. One of the central issues has to do with embryos. State Representative Gino Bolso, who is now running for Congress, was one of the most vocal critics.
We, in our law, very clearly define an embryo to be a person, to be an unborn child. Yet this bill creates a statutory right to create and destroy human embryos without limitation of any kind.
We'll talk about it more this hour, but IVF necessarily fertilizes embryos outside the body, and often there are leftover embryos that are either donated or destroyed.
If you were to concede that you could kill an embryo, then you have given up any scientific argument to outlawing abortion at any further portion of a pregnancy.
And here you have the rub for anti-abortion lawmakers, even though fertility treatment is about creating human life. The legislation was sponsored by two Republican women. State Representative Iris Rutter of Winchester had to stand there and defend her bill from her fellow Republicans.
We don't allow elective abortions in Tennessee. We are pro-life. Yes, we are conservatives. But to me, this is a bill about life. It brings life into the world. It gives families the right to access IVF. It gives families the opportunity to plan their families through contraceptives. That's all this bill does.
And that bill ultimately passed, but only because Democrats also supported it. Of the 99 House members, 45 Republicans either voted no or decided not to vote. We'll talk a little bit about the politics of fertility treatment today, but mostly in this moment, we want to get to know the process and the people who provide the care and receive it. Joining us to share her expertise and perspectives is Dr. Abby Eblen from the Nashville Fertility Center. Dr. Eblen is a double board-certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist. She guides patients through fertility care, including IVF, every day, in fact, a few hours before this, and a few hours this afternoon, and has gone through IVF herself. She also co-hosts the podcast Fertility Doctors Uncensored, if you want to dive deep into the issues related to fertility. So, Abby, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you.
And thank you for bearing with me as I, go through this script of things you know much about and we're going to talk about. But I will say, kind of a disclosure here almost, my wife and I have been in your clinic and have two little ones thanks to fertility treatment there. So, happy customers, I think, as you call them.
Happy to hear that.
But, I feel like as I know enough to know that everyone's fertility treatment's their journey's a little different. So when a patient comes into your clinic, where do you start?
So the very first thing that we do is we really try to identify what the problem is. And so, we want to look at the female partner, see if her fallopian tubes are open. We want to make sure she has a good egg number. We also want to make sure the male partner produces sperm. And as long as she has open tubes and he has sperm and he has an egg, or she has an egg, then a lot of times we'll even try some treatments before IVF. In fact, for most patients, we do that. A procedure where we take, sperm and put it up inside the uterine cavity at the right time in the patient's cycle. If that doesn't work, or if, say, we find out that the male partner has a really low sperm count, regardless of his age, or the female partner has blocked fallopian tubes or doesn't have any fallopian tubes, regardless of the age, those are patients that would probably go directly to in vitro fertilization.
Mm-hmm. So how of folks who come in, how often are patients going to IVF? I mean, is that half the patients? Do folks is it a trajectory toward IVF? Can you give me a rough ballpark?
Well, it's a good question. I think there's more people now that tend to go more directly to IVF because the good news is a lot of jumbo corporations like Walmart, Starbucks, Tractor Supply have started covering the cost of IVF. So we're seeing a record number of people now going through IVF. It depends on finances a lot. It also depends on the age of the patient. And so it's really hard to come up with a specific number of how many patients would go through. But, I would say probably 20 to 30% at least, if not more, ultimately.
And why would they go straight there? Is that because you don't want to waste time on things that are less certain?
Correct. So the scenario I gave you at the beginning where if a man has a very low sperm count, that would be a reason they would go directly, or if the female partner had blocked fallopian tubes or didn't have fallopian tubes, regardless of age. So sometimes we have even really young patients that do IVF. But a lot of times you're right. It's a patient who realizes that, her reproductive lifespan is shortening. So women over 35 to 40, there's a big difference in fertility potential. Over 40, it's very difficult for a woman to conceive. And so some patients do come in that age range and go, I'm really worried about my ability to have a baby. So what's the quickest route to pregnancy? And so IVF is the quickest route to pregnancy and really the most successful route to pregnancy as well.
And that's because why? You don't go, it's not like you decide to do IVF and next month you can do it. You've got to sort of set up the cycle, correct?
I always joke and say it's like building a house. It doesn't happen, immediately. And it's really from the time a patient does all their prerequisite testing, it's about 4 months from start until the time we know that the patient's pregnant.
If you're just joining us, this is Nashville. I'm your host, Blake Farmer. Today we're talking about access to fertility treatment in Tennessee. We're also streaming on our YouTube page. If you would like a visual experience today, that's the Nashville Public Radio YouTube page. Not the easiest place to get, but it's youtube.com/@WPLN. You can find the stream, or if you're listening to a rebroadcast, you can also go check it out. It'll be there. What are some of the reasons people choose not to pursue IVF besides maybe the cost?
Well, the cost is probably the number one reason.
Why? Because most people are paying out of pocket?
Most people, probably about 60 to 70% of our patients pay out of pocket for it, and it is not cheap. It'd be like if you needed a gallbladder surgery and you didn't have insurance coverage, it'd be really expensive to do that too. So this is kind of the same thing. A surgery's involved, and it makes it a lot more expensive.
So besides cost, what do you find is kind of a roadblock for some folks?
I think people are oftentimes overwhelmed. In fact, I always give my disclaimer when I talk to a couple when they come in. I'm like, okay, this is going to be about a 20 or 30-minute discussion. We're going to talk about a lot of things that can be really confusing. We talk about genetics. We talk about the egg retrieval. We talk about the medicines. So I think sometimes patients are just kind of overwhelmed and they have to just kind of leave and let it settle with them for a while. I think, too, sometimes people do worry about having too many embryos. And quite frankly, we hear a lot about that. But more times than not, the situation where women have too few embryos is a bigger deal.
Well, let's go ahead and jump in the deep end there. I mean, so, one of the most sensitive issues around IVF is that the process involves creating embryos. Had in the script earlier today, fertilized embryos, and Catherine, the producer, embryos are fertilized. That's the whole thing. Yeah. So thank you, Catherine, for keeping me straight there. But at what point do you have the discussion of okay, you're going to create embryos, and confession here, I'm not sure that I understood kind of how big a deal that is.
Yeah. Well, the thing that people don't realize is that not every egg that's retrieved makes an embryo. And the challenge that we have is we don't have a crystal ball. And so we don't know which patient is going to have an excessive number of embryos left over, or women that are not going to have enough. And so from our perspective, we fertilize all the eggs. And I tell patients it's like a funnel effect. You start out with maybe, average woman who's healthy, under 35, best prognosis. We start out with maybe 10 or 12 eggs if we're lucky. Not every egg fertilizes. Not every embryo continues to grow. And that's a point I want to get back to. But not every embryo continues to grow. And then certainly not every embryo that we test genetically is genetically normal and would result in a live baby. And so roughly on average, I'll tell my patients you're probably going to have somewhere between 1 to 4 embryos. With each embryo in our practice, that patient would have about a 65% chance of having a live-born baby at the end of 9 months.
And so the point is you can't, for instance, I know other folks have suggested, well, can't you just fertilize one at a time and give it a try? Why is that tricky?
So you can do that. And in fact, sometimes when we think they're going to have a lot of eggs and they're concerned about that, we can actually, so on the day that we retrieve the eggs from the patient can ahead of time choose to say, maybe if we think they're going to get 20 eggs or something, they can say, well, why don't we freeze 10 eggs and not fertilize those? But ultimately, if we only limit to a certain number that we can fertilize, and we do that, I mean, if patients want to do that, we're happy to do that. But the problem is if you pick 3 eggs, at that point, I can't tell you that one egg is better than the other. I can't tell you about the genetics of that egg. And so we may pick 3 eggs that don't fertilize at all, or we may pick 3 eggs that stop growing in a certain phase. And then ultimately, even if we have one embryo to test, that embryo may not be genetically normal. And if it's not, the patient has to start all over, go back through the whole process again. And as I was saying before, the surgery part's the really expensive part of it. And so if they have to go back through a whole nother egg retrieval, so they didn't freeze eggs and have to go through the whole process again, that's going to be probably another $25,000 they're going to spend.
In other words, the reason you try to fertilize as many eggs as possible there is because it's going to cost a lot to do it one at a time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, take us back to biology class for a second. When you're fertilizing, how in your lab, your clinic, are you actually fertilizing? Are you taking the sperm, putting it in the egg with like a needle?
We are. And so pictures of that were shown on the news a lot last year when the Alabama decision came down. That procedure is known as intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. So we're literally able to take one single sperm and put it inside the egg to bring about fertilization. And about 70% of the eggs fertilize in that way.
So you're saying that happens within your lab?
Absolutely,
that's happening there.
Yeah, the magic happens in our lab.
It really does. Well, that we heard some sound from a state representative at the top of the show talking about human life, and they're talking about fertilized embryos essentially, and people hold different views on embryos, but and what legal status they should have. But some politicians say that an embryo is an unborn child, but your clinic would have embryos that are like in freezers there. Are they talking about the same thing that you have there in your Petri dish?
They are. I think what people maybe don't understand as well is the process that happens in our lab. When we take, 6 or 8 eggs and we fertilize those, we know that not every one of even those fertilized embryos are going to continue to grow. That's a process that goes on in the female human body all the time. It's just we don't have a window into the human body to be able to see that. And so the concern is for personhood bills, which I think is kind of what you're talking about. The concern there is if an embryo is given the rights as you and I are, if those embryos stop growing in our lab, say after 2 or 3 days after fertilization, are our embryologist or physicians going to be accused of murder, And so if a bill like that were to pass, that would really paralyze us. And in the state of Tennessee, probably IVF wouldn't be an option for anybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is something like that on the books. I mean, have you all had to kind of keep apprised of state law to make sure that what you are doing, you don't need to change your process somehow?
Absolutely. I think last year, one of the representatives came up with a bill in which there was some wording in there to limit number of eggs that could be fertilized. Yep. It also limited the ability potentially to be able to genetically test an embryo. And the reason for genetic testing is because we're able to identify the embryos that are going to be the most successful. It decreases the risk of miscarriage in women. And also, we have patients who unfortunately have babies that are born with very severe disabilities that result in severe disease or disability in the first 2 years of life. And so we see a lot of couples that come to us that after they've had a child like that, an experience like that, they don't want to put another child through that. And so they come to us and ask us to test the embryos genetically for whatever that condition is that they carry. that could be then passed to another child so that they don't have another affected child. And those things would all be impacted if a bill like that passed.
And are you all ever, is implanting the right word? The embryos, like more than you even want? That you would then reduce embryos during the, during gestation?
The really big benefit, and I've seen this over the course of my career, because when I started out, we didn't do genetic testing, but the huge benefit now is when a woman comes in and she wants to transfer an embryo, we only transfer one embryo at a time. We never do anything more than that. And so the benefit of that is it gives her the best chance for having a single healthy pregnancy. And we know women do much better when they have a single pregnancy as opposed to twins or triplets.
Right. Well, as a physician, what do you think are some of the most common misconceptions about this process, especially as it sort of gets debated, in state law?
Well, I think from my personal perspective, everyone in my office, we all went into this because we want to help couples have families. We're pro-family, 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 and that's why we did this. And I think it would be devastating to our community if we weren't able to perform IVF anymore. I think there's probably plenty of people that are one degree removed of having a baby or from IVF. They have a grandchild, a child. And so I think it would be really devastating to even very young couples that can't have babies any other way if we were not able to do this anymore.
And we'll hear some of those stories in the segment coming up from families who've been through it. One last thing, though, even like nearby Louisiana has a law, I guess, dealing with the disposal of embryos, and one could imagine, states obviously kind of look at other like-minded states on what to do, but I don't know what kind of effect that has had. I think I read that it sounds like a lot of the clinics, they still have IVF there, and the clinics, I think, just store the embryos in other states to protect themselves. But would there be a reason for Tennessee patients, at this point, to store their embryos out of state because of some of the questions lingering around this?
Well, that's a good question. That's probably more of a legal question than a medical question, because embryos, I understand, and I'm not an attorney, but in the state of Tennessee, I understand that they're looked upon as property. So in our clinic, we can't make any call about what the disposition of embryos. That's made by the couple. We do have the capability. We have a storage facility well before this law came in Las Vegas. So our embryos can go to Las Vegas. But certainly there's a concern about the disposition of embryos if, a bill like that passed.
Yeah. Well, we have much more to get at this hour, but it's time to take our first break. Abby, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Abby Evelyn is a double board-certified physician with Nashville Fertility Center, also co-host of the podcast Fertility Doctors Uncensored, and I believe a book that's coming out here sometime soon,
I have a book coming out September 23rd about IVF for patients. It's called the IVF Blueprint.
All right. Well, we'll be looking out for it. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll speak with families who've pursued IVF treatment here in Middle Tennessee. So stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. I'm trying to get used to looking into this camera straight ahead of me here because we also are streaming on YouTube. If you'd like to catch the show there, it's the Nashville Public Radio YouTube page. But yes, the lights are bright here in the studio, and we've got more folks in here. Welcome back. Today, we're talking about fertility treatment, and specifically in vitro fertilization, or IVF, here in Middle Tennessee. IVF rarely gets much public attention, but this year the state legislature had a fairly intense debate about whether or not to specifically protect IVF in state law. Without direct experience, many people don't really know what the experience is like. And frankly, every experience is unique, as you'll see with our guests who are in the studio with us now. Joining us are Kayla Davis, who has 3 children with her husband, Blake. No relation, through IVF. And Laura Lee and Stephanie Paha, who have a 5-month-old son from IVF. Again, we're streaming on YouTube. If you'd like to check in on us, we're at Nashville Public Radio's YouTube page. But Kayla, Laura Lee, Stephanie, welcome to This is Nashville.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. And my producer's correcting me. 4.5 months old. That kid's not 3 months old out there, So, Kayla, let's start with you. How and when did you know that IVF was going to be your journey?
Yeah. So my husband, Blake, no relation,
Right.
he has a condition called cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic condition that he was born with. So he's always known that he has it. Yeah. But on our third date, he felt like, okay, maybe I don't bring this up right away, but after 4 dates, maybe it's too late. So he had this rule that on the third date, he was like, by the way, I have a genetic condition and I cannot naturally have kids. We would have to try IVF if we were going to have children. So that was when I knew right from the very beginning of dating that was going to be a part of our story.
Yeah. And were you familiar with what that would take or how feasible that would be?
Not really. But, at the end of the day, I told him, I am committing to you and to being with you and not the possibility of having children. So if this works out, awesome. If we have that journey together and we have children, wonderful. And if it doesn't, we will have a meaningful life anyway.
Wow. Well, that's a heavy third date. I'll tell you that.
If you know us, it makes sense, though. We were pretty intense at Black Abbey Brewery talking off everything.
Love the visual there. Now, we'll actually hear something recorded from Blake later in just a little bit. All right. So, Laura Lee, Stephanie, how about you? When did you know IVF was going to be the journey?
Well, early in our relationship, we knew we wanted to have kids. Yeah. And obviously, being a lesbian couple, we knew that we were going to need help to make that happen. But we actually started the fertility process going through IUI, the intrauterine insemination. Thank you. And
we're here to help each other with the big words.
I appreciate that. I totally blanked. Still have a little bit of pregnancy brain. And we actually got pregnant on our second attempt with IUI, but unfortunately, I had a miscarriage. But that gave us a lot of hope that we would be able to get pregnant that way. So we kept trying, and we actually went through almost a whole year of trying IUI. We did 8 rounds.
Wow. Which just for, and this came up earlier with Dr. Eblin, her point about why people kind of sometimes jump the line to IVF because it's not like IUIs are free or even cheap.
Yes. And we realized that we had spent a lot of time and a lot of money on those attempts, and it just seemed much, I don't want to say easier, but obviously a much higher possibility that we'd get pregnant through IVF. So we kind of called it quits after those 8 attempts. And in the beginning of 2024, we started IVF.
Wow. And it was successful.
Yes.
And you have evidence. In fact, the evidence is hanging out with one of our producers at Dr. Eblin outside Mary.
Landon.
Well, it's a bummer that he's not in here, making cute sounds. But I think it's probably for the best. So let's. I wonder what was the challenge there with all the. I mean, you kind of gloss over 8 rounds and then the IVF, but I'm guessing this was a year full of some heartache.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I mean, miscarriages. I lost my mom at 33 years old, which was incredibly difficult, but I would put miscarriage right up there with losing a parent because it's just such an emotional roller coaster. You are so incredibly excited, happy, full of joy that you've gotten pregnant, and just like that, it's taken away from you, and you don't know if it's ever going to happen again. So, yeah, I mean, that whole year was filled with a lot of highs and a lot of lows.
And Stephanie, what about, kind of as the supportive partner?
Well, I was going to say I was really mad because I was like, we got spoiled by it working on the second try. That made us be like, oh, well, if it was that easy, this is going to work again. So that's why we kept trying. And I'm also very impatient. And so when I heard how long IVF takes, I was like, well, maybe just one more month of IUI.
Because you can kind of do it every month almost, right? If your body cooperates.
Yeah, pretty much how it was.
So we just kept doing that month after month until finally,
we called it.
It was between us, and then our doctor was like, look, you can do this as much as you want, but practically it's probably going to be much more successful and faster if you pursue IVF.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm Blake Farmer. This is Nashville. We're talking about fertility treatment and specifically in vitro fertilization in Tennessee, which, has been a topic of conversation in the state legislature in the past year and in other states, and even from the White House, kind of on all sides. So we figure it's time to get to know it a little bit better ourselves. So we've got folks in here who have been through it rather recently. So, Kayla, I wonder if you could talk to us about, I don't know, did you all have any, obviously you needed IVF because of your husband's condition, but was it successful, kind of first time's a charm each time?
Yeah, we had kind of a unique situation where IVF was our Hail Mary. So we went in and we started at the end of the road. We're like, is it going to work or it's not going to work? So because we knew what the issue was kind of up front, men with CF are usually born without a Van Deffen tube. So there's sometimes sperm there's sometimes not, but it is the only way. It's the only way to make it work. We did our transfers went really well. So we were really, really fortunate. We did do the genetic testing to see if they were viable, our embryos, and we were really lucky. We had 3 first-time transfer pregnancies.
Wow. Let's hear from the other Blake for just a moment here. This is Kayla's husband, wasn't able to join us today, but we spoke with him to get his perspective on his experience with IVF. Let's take a listen.
Hello, my name is Blake. I am Kayla's husband and the very grateful, albeit tired, father of 3 young children. IVF being a part of my path was not a surprise by any means. I was born with a terminal genetic condition called cystic fibrosis. And I knew that there were infertility issues from a very young age, so there wasn't really a point where IVF became some kind of new, surprising news to me. It was just the method of our ability to try and see if it was possible to have children. Our experience with IVF has been humbling and filled with gratitude. We knew that this was sort of a Hail Mary. There was really no other option for us. The most surprising part to me is that it worked. And it worked on the first try for us, which is so rare, and I feel very blessed. The most challenging part for me was watching my wife go through these procedures and doing shots and all of the necessary steps that it takes. But there was never any shame or frustration expressed from her, and I greatly appreciate that because she knows this wasn't my choice to have cystic fibrosis. It didn't matter that I am the one whose body has the condition that required us to go through IVF. It just showed me such a strength and makes me feel so grateful that she has continually chosen me. To any man facing infertility issues, and really to any woman, I would say, you're not broken and you're not alone. There is no shame in having some kind of medical condition or genetic disposition that means that you have to go through a different pathway. You didn't get to choose the cards you were given, but you get to choose how you're going to play them. And I would say blame has no space in a family. Blame does not build families. Presence does. Partnership does. So be present, be a partner, no matter which side you're on. So if you are listening to this wherever you are in your journey, I just pray a blessing over you that you may find good people, you may find gentle care, and you may find hope in whatever the outcome is, that you are able to look back and know that the team who was around you, the community who was around you, the Tennesseans who were around you were there, were neighbors, and that you were not alone.
That's Kayla's husband, Blake. Is your Blake always so encouraging?
Yeah.
Is that kind of his, that's his gift?
You can see why I kind of married him, right?
Have you all shared this experience with others? I mean, I don't think that I realize, I know I'm certain I didn't realize how common different levels of infertility issues are until going through it myself. And I was like, oh, this is not common. It's like 1 in 6 couples are dealing with something. Do you find yourselves sharing some of your story just to help people understand, like, no, there's other ways?
Yeah, I think we're a pretty open book about most health-related things because I feel like with cystic fibrosis, that's obviously a huge part of our story. But with infertility, we found that so many people experience it and don't discuss it. Like it's just hidden. I was at a Bible study last year and we had 8 girls at our table, 8 women, and half had either had a miscarriage or were struggling with infertility at my table. And it was just eye-opening to be like, this is something that more people need to talk about and more people need support around and more people need to hear. You're not alone in this, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me talk, Laura Lee, for instance, when you all were going through your process, at what point did you all start having the discussion of like embryos that would be created that you may or may not use and having excess? Do you recall kind of when you understood what that really would mean for you all?
Yes. So when I went through IVF, we only had 2 embryos and our first transfer failed. And then Landon was the second transfer. So
it kind of felt like we have one more.
Yes. And we had not talked about that at that point just because we were holding on to so much hope that one of those 2 was going to work. Because at that point, we're like, this could be our only shot. And we hadn't really considered Stephanie going through the process at that point just because we didn't have to.
Well, and there's a huge cost, right? All the medication to prime the body for it.
And all over again. Yeah. But after we got pregnant with Landon, we were like, we would like to have another. So Stephanie actually went through the first part of the IVF process earlier
already
this year. Yeah, just to go ahead and get those embryos. And that's when we started to have that conversation about like, what would we do if, let's say, we do our first transfer and it takes, and then we have extra embryos, like what would happen?
Yeah. And did you all have to state to your doctor like what your plan was, or was it just sort of a conversation letting you know you'll need to make a decision at some point what you do with those? Stephanie,
I'm not even sure we talked about it with the doctor. I just...
it was just between the two.
Yeah, it was just between us.
Well, what... would you say you have it? Obviously, this is a decision for down the road, but is it a decision you've considered?
Yes, because in the beginning, whenever we were going to start IVF, it was in the back of my mind about this from the beginning. So I was relieved when we only had 2 embryos with Laura Lee, and we didn't have to like make a hard decision. And now with our situation, but we talked about it. I've thought about it a lot, and we will, if we have extra, we will donate them to a family in need who needs health, because they're, healthy, viable, good embryos, with all the genetic testing done. So I could not just waste that there's so many people out there who would, die for that embryo.
I know.
And I can't do that.
Yeah.
So
and you want to think like if they're going to that much trouble to go through this process and they would want to adopt an embryo, you have to believe that they're going to be really loving parents.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Yeah. But though, of your children,
yeah,
they're yours. I mean, they're genetically your kids. Yeah.
I know. Wow. I mean, that's going to be one lucky family.
Kayla, how about for you? Did you all have extras that you've had to decide what to do with?
Yeah, we did have some extras. We were very fortunate in the whole process. We haven't decided yet. We're going to wait until our kids get a little older. We're looking at all the different options. Do we donate them to a family in need? Do we donate them to science? Do we just dispose of them? I've always kind of seen it as like, this is my analogy of like making cookies. I don't know. And you have all the ingredients to make the cookie in a bowl, and you put it in the fridge and you save it for later. And then when you're ready to make cookies, you put them in the oven, and then you get your cookie baby, right?
I was not expecting a cookie analogy.
I know. It's
a
very loose analogy. So we poured so much love and time and pain and hope into those potential embryos. And we don't want to make that decision lightly. We might talk to some genetic counselors. We might, we'll pray about it. We might talk to a pastor about it. We're going to cross that road a little bit later when we feel settled and ready to do that.
Yeah. And What of this? I mean, these something that didn't dawn on me until we were going through it. What my wife and I was that these are your full children, you and your husband. These are like they have brothers and sisters who will be walking around this planet if they go to someone else, which honestly had not dawned on me until. It wasn't even the beginning of the process. It was late into it. What does that feel like to think, oh, we could donate, but they would be our kids out there?
Yeah, it's wild. So I've done some deep dives into this as we're kind of looking forward. There are Facebook groups and advocacy groups that are advocating for more of an open adoption. So the children that are born out of these donated embryos, they know that they have genetic siblings and you have a relationship, kind of like a cousin-based relationship with them. There's a lot of different viewpoints on that. It's very interesting.
Because there's really no hiding now that you've got genetic trees that you can just spit in a tube and figure out your DNA.
And you'd want to, I think it's just always better to have those conversations to say, we're not hiding anything. This is an incredible miracle of how you were created. And we're so grateful that you're here. And this is a part of your story. And we want to celebrate that part of your story, even though it doesn't look like everybody else's story. So how can we facilitate that? So I think something that Blake and I are really discussing is that's a huge commitment on our part to be willing to be that biological donor in that child's life forever. You always have access to us. If you ever want to ask about the color of your eyes, if you ever want to ask about, you're going to be a carrier for cystic fibrosis. So what is that going to look like down the line for you? We want to be that resource for them. So we want to always look down the road and count the cost of what that would look like in our life before we make decisions like that. We want to really feel the weight of it. So
I can see why you'd want to sit with that decision for a moment. Laura Lee, wrap us up here. How has going through IVF changed the way you think of fertility treatment? Has it?
Absolutely. I don't think that I thought too much about it in general before we went through it ourselves. And now I consider myself to be a huge advocate. And just we've connected with so many other couples who are going through the process too. And to me, it feels really special to have gone through it and to be able to be somebody who they can use as a resource and support. So, yeah, I mean, I went from being very indifferent to being very supportive about the whole process.
Well, Laura Lee, Stephanie, Kayla, thank you for being here on This is Nashville. We have to take a short break. When we return, we'll speak with an OBGYN who counsels patients through the early stages of navigating potential infertility and who has her own IVF experience, as everyone here has today. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. Well, welcome back. Today we are talking about IVF and fertility treatment in Nashville. This spring, Tennessee became the first state in the South to pass legislation to protect access to fertility treatments and contraception. And we've learned this hour how the handling of fertilized embryos, or just call them embryos, remains a sticking point for some anti-abortion lawmakers because some of those embryos will get destroyed in the process of trying to conceive a child. It's become a more public issue because more couples are turning to IVF to get pregnant. It's now about 1 in every 50 births is thanks to this procedure. I have IVF to thank for my kids, and so does our next guest, who's going to help us understand how she counsels couples heading toward fertility treatment. Dr. Kendra Hazlett is an OBGYN and laborist here in Middle Tennessee. OBGYNs are often the first medical professional that patients speak to about pregnancy or their difficulty getting pregnant. Kendra's on a quick break from seeing patients today, and we're happy to have her here. Kendra, welcome to This is Nashville.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so an OBGYN handles all kinds of things, right? Prenatal care, delivers babies, treats gynecological conditions, handles preventive screenings. What's the role in fertility?
Like you said, like I think we're kind of the first pass that women come to question or to talk about the possibility that they may be infertile.
Well, you've had your own experience with IVF, which we've been talking about much of this hour. And as we said today, every story is different. And yours, as I understand it, was not easy. Where did things kind of get complicated for you, if you could start there?
Well, you're right. I did have my own journey, and Dr. Abby Eblin, bless her.
Oh, who was on the show to start the hour? Yeah.
Yes, she was my REI physician. But when things kind of got sticky from the jump was that I found out that I had fibroids. And fibroids are just usually benign growths of the muscle of the uterus. And I knew that early on. And I had big fibroids. This is even before I wanted to even have children. But I had issues with my cycle, with bleeding, with pain. And when I did find out or, got with my partner, my spouse, and we knew we wanted to have children, that was the first hurdle, were the fibroids. They were in the cavity of the uterus. They were all around my uterus. And Dr. Eblin actually took out 21 fibroids.
I assume the way you're saying that's more than would even be normal for fibroids.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm extra in that way. But
Okay.
Beyond that, I was older in age. I was advanced maternal age, and my egg count was low. And that was a huge hurdle. And beyond that, even after my fibroid surgery, we found that my tubes were blocked. So I had, the three biggest hurdles that women can have is the tubular portion, the uterine portion, which is where the baby grows, as well as the ovarian side where my egg count was low.
So you're saying that as you approach fertility treatment, your question in the back of your head is this even possible with me?
That was the big question. And I'll be transparent in that. I went to one REI physician, and he straight out told me on my very first time visiting him after I had lab work done that I would never have my own children.
Wow.
He told me that.
Wow.
And that was big for me, even as a physician. And I know the risk, but I'm a faith and faith-based woman and a God-fearing woman. And so I went for a second opinion, and Dr. Eblin was my second opinion.
Well, was it somehow dangerous to do this because of all that you had going on?
Nope, I didn't think it was dangerous, and again, that's why you get a second opinion. So I wanted to see what, even beyond my training, Dr. Eblin has that board certified, and she went longer than I did to tell me, hey, look, this is going to be difficult, but I think I have a way that if you're willing to try, I'm willing to try, and we can see if this is going to work.
Well, so talk to me from your vantage when you're working with patients. When is it that a patient, you might steer them toward a fertility clinic rather than, sort of giving it time?
And I think I heard Dr. Eblin say this earlier. A lot of times it's based on age. You also take the total picture into account. So is there a history of, for instance, chemo? Is there a history of radiation previously? Is there a history of prior ectopic pregnancy? Have you ever been pregnant before? And women who are less than the age of 35, we usually give, as a general OBGYN, we give a year's worth of unprotected frequent intercourse. That's what I always tell patients. And then after that, if you are not pregnant, then I can kind of start to introduce that conversation. When you are over the age of 35 and you are advanced maternal age, then your window is shorter. It's closing more rapidly. So then you give a 6-month time period. And then after that, then again, we need to kind of really be thinking about what the next steps are beyond the general OBGYN.
Do you find that your patients are often in more of a hurry than they need to be, as in, like, they say, we've been trying for 3 months and it just hasn't happened, or that they don't realize that at some point in life the clock is ticking?
I think there's two extremes.
Really?
And that's a very, very interesting question, because you'll find a lot of patients that are like, we just got married 6 months ago. We've been trying for 3 months and nothing has happened. I'm like, well, you have to give it some time. You ovulate from one side or the other every other month. And, there's things that you can do to help increase that possibility of success. And so let's do those things. Versus there are some who are like, I've been trying for 5 years and nothing has happened. And they waited 5 years and they haven't been anywhere. And they just said, okay, finally, someone told me I need to talk to somebody.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville. I'm your host, Blake Farmer. Today, we're talking about access to fertility treatment in Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't require insurance coverage for IVF, and most states don't at this point. But so for patients of yours who can't afford it and are they're talking to their OBGYN, what do you tell them?
I tell them it's hard. I say, get what you can get done that's covered. So, I can, as a general OBGYN, I can draw your AMH, which is your anti-Mullerian hormone level, that lets me know what your ovarian reserve is, and that can be covered. Also, I can order, a specific type of ultrasound that can show whether or not your tubes are open. I can get that done and we can get that covered. I can code it in a way that we can hopefully get that covered for you. So those little things that we can do on my end before you go to the reproductive endocrinology and infertility physician or provider, we try to do that part first. And then if we still are unsuccessful, then I think we need to kind of move towards the specialist.
Kind of switching gears just a moment here before we wrap up. When the Tennessee legislature voted narrowly to protect IVF this year, they were also voting to protect contraception, and that even included the morning after pill, which often gets lumped into the abortion debate and such.
Abortion.
Do you feel like contraceptive options are adequately protected here at this point?
With the new bill, I think now they are. I mean, people have to realize that we need birth control. We need contraception. That choice and that option has to be out there, because just like we have women who are unable to become pregnant, we have women who are very fertile, and there is the option to not want to be pregnant anymore, and they should be afforded that option. And then women who sometimes outside of their own vices, have other things that are going on psychologically, psychiatrically, socially, and emotionally, and who cannot take care of their children. And so then you start to think about the snowball effect beyond, me personally take care of my own children. When I cannot do so, where does that leave the children in the system? Where does that leave the burden of, adoption, childcare,
two sides of the same coin, I guess. As we wrap up this conversation, we've heard a lot about IVF this hour, and while more couples are needing this kind of intervention to get pregnant, it won't be the story for most couples. So I wonder, as someone who's gone through it, who has patients who do, what would you say to listeners who just may not be entirely comfortable with how fertility treatment or even contraception is being used?
I always tell my patients, if it's for you, it's for you. If this is something that you really want, then, you will make a way, and whatever your higher power is will make a way. And like I said, in my situation, I had all those hurdles. We ended up with one healthy embryo, and now I have 5-year-old identical twins.
Wow.
So that you want to just be able to have the option. I think that, we do need more legislation around it or more coverage. I think that'd be great, because it is a very expensive process. But beyond that, either you want to do it or you don't. If you don't believe in it, if you think that you don't want to do it, I think that's your personal opinion, and you're entitled to that opinion. But there are some women and some couples who deserve to be able to have children. And sometimes for one reason or another, they can't. And I think that this is something that we have available and have the expertise as well as the technology to do so and to do it successfully and safely.
Well, Kendra, thank you for taking a moment between patients to be here. Dr. Kendra Hazlett is an OBGYN at Centennial Women's Hospital. Thanks for joining us on This is Nashville.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Catherine Ruppeld. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lindley. Our board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind that theme music you hear are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. You can also simply ask a smart speaker to play the latest episode of This is Nashville. Dare you to try it. Conversation doesn't have to end here. You can comment, tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message. We listen to all of them at 615-751-2500. You can also find us on Blue Sky and Instagram and X at This is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.